Hello Newport Symphony supporters, I'm Alistair from the Violin section. And I'm also Alistair from the Violin section. Welcome to our NSO To Go Baroque Edition. Today I'm playing the Baroque Violin and will be joined by Robert Busey from the bass section. First, I should probably go over some of the differences between the Baroque violin and the modern violin. The Baroque violin has a shorter fingerboard compared to the modern violin. You will also notice the modern violin has a chin rest, whereas the Baroque violin does not. The Baroque violin has a simpler tailpiece where the strings attach, versus the modern violin that has fine tuners on the tailpiece. The bridges are similar, although the Baroque bridge is slightly smaller and lighter. There are some other differences that you will notice in the neck. The Baroque's violin neck comes directly up from the body, whereas the modern violin's neck is angled slightly back. To compensate for this, the Baroque violin has a wedged fingerboard, whereas the modern violin's fingerboard is rather straight from one end to the other. Internally, there are some differences too. Underneath the G string runs a bass bar. On the Baroque violin, this bass bar is shorter and lighter than on the modern violin. Underneath the opposing foot of the bridge is a sound post that connects the front of the violin to the back of the instrument. The sound post on the Baroque violin is also lighter and thinner. One of the major, most important differences, however, is the construction of the strings themselves. Baroque violins are strung with gut strings made of sheep intestines. Sometimes the lower or thicker strings will have a gut core but may be wound with silver. On the modern violin, most strings either have metal or synthetic cores and are also wound with silver. So you may ask, why all of these differences? Over the centuries, as music has become more challenging and concert halls have become larger, the violin family has needed to create a bigger sound with stronger projection that can reach the very back of the largest concert halls versus the smaller rooms and the reverberant churches that most Baroque music was normally played in. In order to do this, the strings had to be strung with much higher tension, and so changes needed to be made to support the higher tension on the modern violin. Some audible differences will be the pitch of the instrument. Most Baroque players today play at a pitch slightly lower, called A equals 415. 415 refers to the hertz or frequency of vibrations or sound waves. On a modern piano, this pitch of 415 corresponds to the pitch A flat. To modern ears, the pitches of the Baroque violin strings from lowest to highest sound like G flat, D flat, A flat, and E flat. The modern violin is pitched at A equals 440, the standardized modern pitch, which is 1/2 step higher. Baroque pitch was not standardized. Most Baroque players at the time tuned their instrument to the pitch of the organ at the particular church of the town where they lived in Europe. It wasn't until many centuries later that we established a standardized pitch of A equals 440. So why 415 now for Baroque players? It's mostly convenience. Many harpsichords have something called a transposing keyboard. They can shift the pitch of the keyboard down one set of strings to play either modern settings at 440 or at Baroque settings at 415. It's easy to shift a lever and move the keyboard down 1/2 step without having to retune the entire instrument. There is one other major difference between Baroque playing and modern playing, and that's in the bow that we use. The Baroque bow is on top and the modern bow is underneath. One of the major differences that you will notice is that the Baroque bow is slightly shorter. Baroque bows come in many different lengths. This particular bow is a long bow. Short bows were used for dance music and long bows for solo and orchestral instrumental music. You will also notice that the Baroque bow's tip is much pointier than the modern violin bow. In addition, the arch of the Baroque bow is convex. It arches wider at the middle of the bow and tapers towards the end of the bow. The modern bow is wider at the tip and at the frog and becomes more concave towards the middle of the bow. This creates a more even sound where the player can sustain a sound from the frog to the tip of the bow more easily. Many times you will hear Baroque players tapering their notes. As they go towards the end of the bow, the volume becomes softer and softer. Because the Baroque bow is so much lighter, it is more articulate. But it doesn't have as much power nor the volume as created with the modern bow. I liken the difference in the bow styles to speaking with the Baroque bow with more articulation, versus singing with the modern bow, where pitches can be sustained. Let's listen to the same passage played on both violins. Finally, I'd like to mention that a Baroque or modern violin doesn't necessarily relate to its actual age, but relates to the way it is set up. My modern violin was made circa 1780 during the classical period in the workshops of the Galliano family in Naples, Italy. But over the centuries, it has undergone many adjustments to bring it from its Baroque to its modern form. Whereas my Baroque violin was made during modern times in 1988 in Brattleboro, Vermont, in the workshop of luthier Douglas Cox. What makes it Baroque is the setup and how it is currently constructed to meet Baroque specifications. We hope that you enjoy this Larghetto movement from George Frederick Handel's Concerto Grosso in B minor, Op.6 No. 12.